Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Rausan Pereira. Trade ministers of 16 nations, including India and Japan, have instructed their negotiators to exert utmost efforts for early conclusion of the talks for the proposed mega trade deal, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. RCEP aims to cover goods, services, investments, economic and technical cooperation, competition and intellectual property rights. The progress of the negotiations was discussed during the 6th RCEP ministerial meeting concluded on Friday in Singapore. The ministers adopted a package of year-end deliverables developed by the Trade Negotiating Committee and welcomed the plans to achieve the targets set out in the package, a joint statement said. It was issued after the conclusion of the two-day RCEP ministerial meeting. They expressed hope that completion of the package would signify the substantial conclusion of the negotiations this year. Further, they underscored the significance of establishing the world's largest free trade area among 16 countries under RCEP amidst the escalating trade frictions. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the 6th RCEP meet. Joining me on the program today are Swaran Singh, Professor, International Studies, JNU, Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Professor Chaturvedi, Director General, RIS. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. First, let's try and put into perspective what RCEP is and what would these 16 countries like to achieve from it.
You know, basically the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership organization, it was established in 2012, November 2012, and negotiations started in May of 2013. One could say that possibly this was a reaction to the negotiations that had been undertaken by the United States in the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and there it was found that China was kept out of that. So this was an attempt by China to expand its region of influence and horizon. So that is how it started. So at the moment there have been 23 negotiating sessions that have been held amongst the 16 countries. The 16 countries are the 10 members of ASEAN plus the 3 East Asian countries, China, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, New Zealand. So basically it is all these countries in Asia. So the idea was that all these countries would be able to put together a free trade agreement between these countries, and this would include not only goods but equally importantly investments, services, e-commerce, intellectual property rights, technical cooperation, competition. So it would be a broad-based, comprehensive sort of an agreement. Now 23 negotiation sessions have been held. The 6 ministerial sessions have been held. And although we have come through about 6 years, but still I can say that end is nowhere in sight. And at the moment, there are a number of outstanding issues, particularly as far as India is concerned. Primarily, one of the...
I think we'll get into those issues later on in the program, but let's try and establish first what happened at the 6th RCEP meet itself. Professor Chaturvedi, what were the takeaways for you?
There are 4 important areas that Rcep has tried to address, and one of them is in terms of what kind of approach India should have at Rcep. And this is in terms of a tiered structure that India had proposed, and now we have come back to that after dropping that strategy for a while, which means that the countries with which we do not have free trade agreement, we would have a tiered structure where tariff would be different from what we would be extending to the countries wisely of ASEAN with which we have FTA. Number 2 would be this great convergence that ASEAN plus 6, as Ambassador Sajjanhar very rightly mentioned, is the formulation. And this convergence of different areas, and your report also mentioned about it, that I think is absolutely fascinating in terms of providing the deeper economic integration in the region. Number 3 is in terms of identifying services, and services which hitherto was largely an Indian agenda in Rcep, now is no more the case. Countries are open to it, facts and figures are on table, that services is not just Indian concern, but also that of ASEAN. We have also reduced this idea of movement of natural person, MNP, as the sole strategy. Number 4 and last is in terms of the whole focus on NTBs, which generally do not allow you to leverage the market access that you usually get. So the focus of Rcep on these 4 areas, I think, make it a great opportunity for the region.
Right. Professor Swaran Singh, conceptualized in 2012, as the ambassador was pointing out, talks beginning in 2013. They were supposed to have concluded in 2015, yet here we are in 2018 and the end doesn't look near. What is the issue really?
I think there are several issues on the table, and that's a usual process. Any such large-scale economic bloc emerges and creates a free trade area for itself. There's a whole variety of countries involved here, and they have natural serious concerns about each other. For example, Professor Chaturvedi mentioned about services. Most of these nations have major concerns in opening this services sector because they are afraid of enormous number of professionals from China and India moving into these countries and then taking over some of those opportunities there. Within ASEAN itself, there is no consensus as of now. And then, of course, China has major concerns in opening up even goods trades because it has major trade deficit, about $44 billion with South Korea. Of course, India has its own concerns. India now also sees that we already have enormous amount of trade deficit when it comes to countries that are involved in a regional comprehensive economic partnership. Major among them would be, for example, China, where the deficit has gone up from 51 to $63 billion. We have a similar number of enormous deficit with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and to open our market to their goods, which they want us to virtually eliminate all tariffs. And India is talking of staggered way of handling that situation, and we have certain earmarkers as to how much we can allow that to happen. And then, of course, India has domestic issues where several departments, industry sectors, for example, food processing, textiles, which are labor intensive. Even steel, which is going to see enormous dumping from China, given the fact that US tariffs on exports of steel and iron and steel on China are increasing. So India has enormous concerns of its own. So likewise, several countries have their own concerns, and it's not easy to really reach at a consensus very quickly. So that's why delay. So focus now, as you saw this Friday, in their joint statement, is to highlight that there is a global crisis of trade wars, and therefore increased responsibility on RCEP countries to ensure a fast pace to create a kind of what they call rule-based inclusive trade and open trade arrangements. And second, they are also highlighting the fact that they need to really, if not achieve the full set of things, you mentioned regional blocks would need sort of addressing goods, services, investments, technology transfers, competition and IPRs. They are focusing on what could be deliverables at this stage. So there are 3 things that they are identifying as packages for themselves, which is government procurements, trade facilitation, and of course one more sector of custom procedures. So they are looking at what is deliverable in terms of packages by November summit of ASEAN. And as the Trade Minister of Singapore said, who's hosting the meeting, that actual language of what draft would come next year. So I think they are looking at what is achievable at this stage.
Considering what has happened over the last 6 years, are these deliverables achievable by the year end is another big question that comes up, Ambassador.
Frank, what they have been able to discuss on during the 23rd session, and there they have been able to complete discussions and negotiations on 4 chapters, as was mentioned by Professor Swaran Singh, that is customs procedures and trade facilitation, that is, and then on government procurement. Basically making a trade more predictable, making trade more certain, and introducing greater transparency as far as the trading regimes are concerned. So this would definitely be, one of the early harvest package, so to say, if one can look at it. But there are other issues and one dare say, particularly as far as India is concerned, because India has been under enormous pressure from other countries because they are like many times in the past, many of these countries have focused on India. They are targeting India as a country that is blocking progress, that is not moving adequately fast in terms of bringing down its tariffs.
You know, even this time, there were several media reports that suggested that the 10 ASEAN countries want to go ahead with the RCEP without India. So that is precisely what you're talking about.
Absolutely. You know, Frank, there was, even at the 23rd session which took place in Bangkok, there was pressure by countries like Indonesia and Australia to sort of, send out veiled messages to India that you need to move forward. Otherwise, you will be left behind and we'll go forward. I think we should not be cowed down by such veiled threats or warnings, because India is a big market, and I think the prize that Rcep has going forward will really be the increased demand as far as the Indian market is concerned. Otherwise, you look at it, China has a free trade area with most of these countries. India has with ASEAN, we have an agreement with Japan, we have an agreement with South Korea. We are working on a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement with Australia and New Zealand, but that doesn't seem to be going anywhere at this moment. So India is really the big prize, and if there is no significant advantage as far as India is concerned, and India can see that it is in the area of services in terms of sending out its skilled professionals to these countries. And we have found that particularly the developed countries in this grouping, countries like Australia, countries like New Zealand, like Singapore, they are not making any meaningful suggestions or offers to India, while they are pressurizing India. And as has been mentioned also, out of these 15 other countries, India has large trade deficits with 10 of them. We speak about the $63 billion with China, but if you take Indonesia, if you take Australia, if you take Japan, if you take New Zealand, with all of them, not only do we have large trade deficits, but they have increased very significantly last year. So that makes our condition, our situation rather difficult, and that is why India has said that we would like a fair, balanced, equitable, comprehensive and inclusive trading arrangement, because it shouldn't be that the focus is only on trade in goods where others have advantages, and it doesn't focus on services where India has something to gain from that.
Right. So, Professor Chaturvedi, India's concerns then are justified as far as Rcep is concerned, and clearly those aspects need to be addressed if we need to go ahead with it.
Mark, I think when you say India's concerns are justified, we would have to realize the plurality of views that we have in India. The revenue collecting department and Ministry of Finance, they have one set of view. The media is full these days with what different perspectives different government agencies have. I think time has come within the country that we scale up importance of having this kind of trading arrangement in place to be taken up at the highest political level. The technical work, the work of these specific agencies, I think in my view is over. We need political guidance in terms of how we move forward, because each department, each agency would definitely try to maximize the mandate that they have, and that probably would lead to a sort of stalemate. The frustration of the countries that are there on the table with us, and as Ambassador Sajjanhar rightly mentioned, 23 rounds have gone by, and we had 4 joint statements on this. We had around 8 ministerial statements. So enough work has been done. Now at the apex level, direction has to come in as to how we move forward. And the point that you raised in the beginning, whether we would be able to achieve the timeline. So if that has to be achieved, of course, we should not get cowed down, as was rightly mentioned. But I think it's equally important that we have a coherent and cogent position coming up in next few months. And as you are aware, the government has already constituted the group of ministers, and they are deliberating on this issue. I think there is no way that we can decide to opt out of RCEP. We should be part of it, and we should try to evolve the system further. Definitely, if TPP was a parallel for RCEP, the tiered approach of countries getting longer time durations for implementation should be built in, number one. Number two, if specific sectors are reserved, and as India proposed, 74% concession for countries with which we do not have FTA, and 80% concession for those with whom we already have FTA. I think if that is acceptable to rest of the countries, we should go ahead and we should freeze it. As I emphasized earlier, non-tariff barriers are our major concerns. So conformity assessments, the mutual recognition agreements, and provisions for countervailing duties and subsidies related regimes, they are to be addressed. India has already tried to accomplish, and this government particularly has taken measures for opening up of government procurement system, making it more transparent, something that WTO always wanted it. We have, right from 2002 onwards, have implemented trade facilitation agreement in a major way. Now we have implemented all the 4 articles, Article 8, Article 10, Article 12, all the 3 which WTO wanted as part of our trade facilitation commitment. So we have already moved ahead, and we are moving forward with the automation of the custom services.
Right.
Now 98% of our exporters and 92% of our importers are able to file export and import documents on electronic EDI system. So this has given the heft that is required in the trade. Given the reality that now 56% of our GDP is coming from our engagement with external sector, we require more and more participation of India in global negotiations and groupings like this.
Points taken. Yes,
so from
Ambassador.
that point of view, it is important that we go ahead with RCEP.
You know, just one point there to supplement what Professor Chaturvedi has said. Number one, we started, with the proposition that we will provide about 42% of trade coming in from China. We will provide liberalization. That moved further to 74% for China and 86% for the other countries with whom we have FTAs. That has not been acceptable to the negotiating partners, and what they want is 92% of our trade with all these countries to be included in the RCEP final document. And I think that what was earlier mentioned also, that there are sectors like textiles, there are sectors like agriculture, there are sectors like food processing, iron and steel, which are rather, meaning these are job intensive, these are labor intensive.
Right.
So I think there it does become a problem. And the second point is that, all the FTAs we had gone in with an open mind that they will be able to give benefit to us. Unfortunately, the final result so far that we have seen is that they have not really helped. Of course, what is lacking is on our side also, because we are not export competitive. But rather than opening up our markets in a staggered manner, I think we really need to do how to take maximum advantage of the opportunities while not being completely saddled with the imports coming as a result of lowering of tariffs and NTBs.
Right. Professor Swaran Singh, the tariff war between the US and China, is that also playing on the minds of these 16 countries? Is that a major factor?
I'm sure it is playing, because once there are tariffs which are increasing from United States to China primarily, but several other countries, they will have to look for alternative destinations. And they are exploring those alternative destinations. That's the reality. But that trade war is also being used as a rhetoric to emphasize that we need to, accelerate our pace of negotiations. We need to move and achieve something quicker than it looks like we can. Already, we are now aware that so much of gap appears between where India wants to negotiate and where other nations wish India to negotiate. But also, I think important to underline that India is not seen as a spoiler of any kind of an outcome here. There are other countries that also have serious concerns and they have their own reservations, except that perhaps India's reservations are slightly more than other countries' reservations at this stage, and also the fact that domestically we have certain amount of disjunctions both inside the government and between government and industry. For example, important people like the former Foreign Secretary Jaishankar, or the current Niti Aayog member V.K. Saraswat, or the former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam have openly said we need to have much more caution. And even when they were going to negotiate on the 6th ministerial meeting, there was reports that without naming an official who said we will continue to negotiate until the PMO tells us to stop. So there is a sense that we could be seen reaching a situation where we can move no longer. And of course, there are enormous implications of stepping out of such a negotiation. And the fact that India is not part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, we opted out of it. We stayed in this regional comprehensive economic partnership. So it's going to be really a kind of a slug wash on several issues over a period of time. So as I said, they are at this stage only trying to see what can be seen as deliverables, so that the leaders, when they meet in Singapore in November, they have something to showcase as a movement forward.
Right.
But there is absolutely no picture clear at this stage that any RCP is going to happen in any time soon now.
Right. Closing comments now from all my guests, starting with you, Ambassador. Professor Chaturvedi, of course, believes that India should be a part of Rcep. There are several people who believe that India should not be a part of Rcep because we have FTAs with the 10 ASEAN countries. We are working out some kind of an FTA with Australia and with New Zealand. And of course, South Korea and Japan too, we have very robust ties with them. So why be a part of something which is driven by China and which is China-centric?
I don't think we should take it as driven by China. My position also is that we should continue to negotiate. We should be a part of it. And we should negotiate very hard. We should protect all our interests, promote and expand our interests across the board. Withdrawal is not an option in my view, but I think wherever there are advantages, but at the same time, there should be no fear of being isolated and cowed under pressure. So I think both we should be robust in our negotiations. Having negotiated in the WTO, when in the Uruguay round, when there was so much of pressure on us on intellectual property rights and on services, I've gone through that and I know that our negotiators can do it. So I think we have to dig in our feet. That was the message coming out also from the group of ministers meeting that has been constituted in August, and all the ministers met and they said that we will continue with the negotiation.
Right.
It is not a defeatist attitude that we have to take. It is a positive, robust attitude that we will go out to achieve what we need, what the country needs.
And we will look out for our best interests at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Professor Chaturvedi, the way forward.
2 points. One, why not we sign FTA with China? That's important. And before we close RCEP, we should initiate this process. That's point number one. Point number two, we should also ensure, which right now is very weak in the current proposed RCEP framework, is the dispute resolution system. And given the kind of situation we are ending up with at WTO, we know that by 2020, the DSP mechanism in WTO would not be functional. So you require the regional trading arrangements to have their own version of DSP, and India should press for that. It should be part of the regional agenda within RCEP. So in my view, we should go ahead with RCEP. We should try to have FTA with China, and we should try to have strong mechanisms for dispute resolution.
Professor?
I think caution but hard negotiations, of course, at the same time. See, most of such arrangements end up favoring the goods rather than services. That is an experience of various such arrangements. And when we look at China and FTA with China, China has advantage of manufacturing sector compared to India having advantage of services sector. So it is very likely that we will open our markets, deficit will start growing further. So hard negotiations where we can create more space for Indian services to be really delivered in some of these nations, and fighting for our interests. And I think that's what all countries are doing, and I think some countries are definitely more influential than others.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. You can share your feedback and your suggestions with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it on this edition of India's World. See you again next time.